iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hello and welcome back to the iHeartPodcast speaker series. I'm Will Pearson, president of iHeartPodcast. One of my favorite conversations every week when we get a chance to chat with one or more of our creators to talk about their podcast, hear what they're up to, where they see the industry going. And today feels like a very fitting conversation. We've been having a lot of conversations around here around budgets and around how we all spend and how we all think about money. And it's something that sometimes we're afraid to talk about, but it's the kind of thing that's really important to talk about and to be smart with our money. And we have two fantastic hosts that are here to talk about their show, Frugal Friends. It's a really fun approach to talking about these kinds of topics. It doesn't have to always be super stressful, and it can be the kind of thing where you can just have a good casual conversation about it. Jen and Jill are the best at this. So thanks for joining us today. How are you guys doing?
Thanks so much for having us, Will, and that amazing intro. We do love to say if it's not fun, it's not Frugal Friends. So you've got it. You understand.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you. So I was listening to your latest episode, and my wife is going to be excited because my wife is a big fan of the Enneagram system. She and many of her friends, as I'm sure you're hearing from a lot of them, because she's into the whole like personality thing and then learning how that applies to how we spend money or save money or think about money was pretty interesting. So maybe we'll come back to that in a second, but it was definitely fun to hear that episode, and I sent it to her. But would love to go back to the beginning. First of all, how the two of you met, how the two of you decided to start making Frugal Friends. Tell us how that came about.
Back in 2017, my husband and I were in the middle or near the tail end probably of paying off our student loans. So we ended up paying off $78,000 of debt in 2 years, which was very difficult. And I have mixed feelings about recommending how we did it, but I talk a lot about that on the show, saying that you can get the same results without putting yourself through what I put myself through. But in that season, I was on Facebook and saw that this guy, Eric, who I'd met at a party once and then never talked to again for like 7 years, was in town with his wife on a road trip and wanted to see if anybody wanted to hang out. And knowing that he did not mean me, because he did not remember who I was, but I was like, my friends and I are going out and you guys are welcome to join us at this bar at sunset. They give free shots at sunset, which is why we were there.
I remembered it being free champagne, but it wasn't that classy. It was shots.
Not that classy.
Tiny little champagnes, yeah.
Yeah, tiny, fruity little champagnes. And we met and we hit it off very fast, talking about our journey. And they were living in an RV at the time, doing that RV lifestyle before it was cool, to save money for Jill's master's program. So we just instantly connected. And I was blogging about personal finance, but Jill was a social worker and she had like no personal finance interests at all.
I was just living the life of
right,
paying attention to finances.
So a year later, Eric, her husband, wanted to get into producing podcasts because as a longtime music producer, he saw that's really where a lot of audio was going. And so we decided we would do 10 episodes, just get him something in his portfolio. And over 300 episodes later, we've never missed a week.
That is unbelievable. Now, you guys have such a rhythm to it and a great rapport with each other. Had either of you either made a podcast before or been in front of the mic at all for other projects, or is this a completely new thing for both of you?
Completely new for both of us, although I will say in my background as a social worker, I do a lot of training. So public speaking is something I'm quite familiar with. It's a different animal in some ways to be on the mic in a living room, just chatting with a friend. But I think one kind of went with the other and helped me become a better interviewer, a better speaker, just better on the mic without an entire audience in front of you, which is kind of nice. And I think helps give that rapport where I truly am talking to a friend. So many people will comment about our podcast saying, it sounds like you guys are just friends. And we're like, we are though. It's
Yeah.
not, we're not just putting on a show. Like once we stop recording, we're going to keep hanging out. And so I think that helps too, that we truly are friends who get to talk and learn together. So it wasn't a twist of my arm to do this with one another, because it only benefits me. I can learn along the way, along with our audience.
It all comes through so clearly, though. I know there are people that are pretty good at putting on a show, but when two hosts really are friends and you can tell there's that mutual respect and just care for each other, like it's hard to miss that. And you guys do such a fantastic job with that. Have you felt the show evolve over time, though, when you're talking hundreds of episodes? Like looking back to the very beginning, is it one of those where you're like cringy, like, oh, when we were first doing this? How do you feel about the evolution of the show?
Definitely changes have happened, but I would say more ideologically than what you're actually going to hear in the show. If you were to go back to our very first episode, which people said, don't worry about that first episode, no one's going to listen to it. And then for the longest time, it was our most listened to episode.
Mhm.
But the formatting, the music, the segments, we had it all on the very first episode all the way up to episode 315. It's going to sound in its rhythm pretty similarly. But I would say how we talk about this idea of frugality, what we've learned along the way in the last 5 years. And I think permission to change is one of the things that we talk to our audience and one another about all the time, that hopefully we won't even be saying the same things in 5 years from now that we're saying today. I don't think we've lost the core of who we are, but I think moving from a scarcity mindset, somewhat in our own lifestyles, to this values-based spending, the freedom for how our financial life looks person to person, and the ability to redefine frugality, that it's not just clipping coupons and pinching pennies, but it's actually an ability to spend on a vacation that is luxurious if that aligns with your value system and you have made intentional plans to do that. So I would say those are the things that have shifted. So sometimes where there might be cringe is looking back at, oh, I might not have said it exactly that way. But at the same time, I think it gives space for all of us to recognize there's a journey and things are going to change in our lives. And we are going to experience different things throughout that time that might shift how we engage with our finances.
Jen, I'm curious to hear from you. You're the author of multiple books. You're a personal finance expert, and I'm curious to know how the podcast space feels different in terms of the way that you communicate, what maybe you're able to do through podcasting that you couldn't do through, authoring books. What would you say to that?
I'm lucky in that all of the writing jobs that I've had, and then obviously with the books, I've been able to write very much how I speak. But I always viewed myself as a writer. I never viewed myself as a podcaster. I was reluctant to start the podcast at first because of that. I was like, I'm not a public speaker. This is not my comfort zone. And then it wasn't until we started that I really realized, like, I love speaking first. The way that I write is actually speaking in my head, and I just write it down. And now I get to just speak first and speak only. But it's a great freedom to be able to view, like, I get to have a conversation with Jill, which is fantastic, because writing, I can view somebody. I always write for one person in mind, and try to teach them a lesson. And now I get to do that and have a conversation with a good friend in the same time. And she will have insights that I didn't have, and I will have insights that she didn't have. And it all makes for a better experience for the listener, because no matter who they are, we're talking to that one person. But if they're resonating more with Jill's experience over mine, they get something that I could not have provided them on my own.
How personal do you allow the show to get in terms of the things that you each struggle with financially, or struggle with in terms of the sort of guilty pleasures that you might have, or the ways that you'd like to spend? I'm curious to hear from, maybe Jill, I'll throw to you first on that one.
We're getting better and better at this. Jen loves to call our lightning round the vulnerability round. It's interesting for me, although I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I provide therapy, and vulnerability is something I talk about in that setting. I understand boundaries in a very specific way. And so to recognize that this is going out to the masses and what do I want to choose to share? But I think this challenge over the last 5 years of a more integrated self, which is what we talk about when it comes to finances, of we are not, it's not this half of our body over here floating in the outer space. It's attached to our entire personhood, and our financial life impacts our relational, emotional, mental, spiritual, physical. And so it has been a good challenge for me to be more vulnerable with protection. I'm still choosing what I will and won't share, but we then have seen such a warm welcome from our community with that of, "Oh, thank you so much. I've been dealing with the same thing. I didn't have language to put around it." And I think as we see that, it is helping both of us to be willing to share, because reality is, and we talk about this very plainly, we're not perfect. We don't have perfect budgets. We make mistakes along the way. We are still coming upon our ideas about these things. We're changing. What Jen valued before having 2 kids is different than what she values now after having 2 kids. So I'm recognizing more and more what the space that's creating, the freedom, the permissions for our audience. So it's growing in me this ability to be more vulnerable with the larger community.
Yeah, and I love vulnerability just from years of doing SEO writing and how everything on the front page of Google is so stale. It's so formulaic. But the way people really learn is from the life experiences of other people. And so I love that vulnerability, but obviously, like what Jill said with protections, I don't know if she made it up, but Nicole Walters once said, "I share my scars, not my scabs." So waiting until something has healed enough to share it, but not raw enough where it's still being processed. So that's
Yeah,
kind of how we gauge that.
that's such a great line. Don't you want to one day come up with a line like that where you're like, God, that's so smart. That's
Right?
such a good line. Yeah,
It's okay though. We
I'm
can
gonna
repeat
say.
it and sound like
Yes.
Yes.
10% less
Right?
smart.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna be like, I'm not sure if Jen Smith came up with this line, but I did hear her once say. But no, so that's terrific. And I'm curious to hear if you've noticed the things that your audience is interested in hearing, or the things that you're hearing from your audience. Has that changed at all over the last 2, 3 years as we've sort of been through pandemic and sort of kind of post-pandemic and now wherever we are right now? Are there trends you're noticing in terms of the types of questions you're getting from listeners?
Yeah. So we just did a whole big fact finding mission surveys and all that because we just got a book deal with HarperCollins. And we wanted to know from our listeners, what are the things that you're loving hearing from us the most? And the thing we heard time and time again was this concept of values based spending. So a lot of listeners will come to us because they're like, I know I should probably do better with budgeting. I should probably make an effort to like spend less. But that's kind of the iteration. They think they're supposed to, and then they'll make a budget and not stick to it and think they're bad with money. And so that's where we catch a lot of people. And so this concept of values-based spending is kind of catching those people and saying it's not, the budget is not the solution to spending money, and spending money is not the enemy. We make all these jokes about avocado toast and lattes are the enemy, and sometimes they're the hero if you want to go to the other end of the spectrum. In reality, what we want most in life is often the things money can't buy, but you still need money to do them. So when you identify the big things in life that you value and the small things, then you can spend without guilt on those things. And when you learn that, you're more motivated to learn the skills and the life hacks and the boundaries and all these things that help you say no to the things that don't matter as much. So that is what we have been really honing in on for the past few years, is what are those things that we can teach people to do that help them say no, not to everything, but to the things they have defined as things that don't matter as much to me, or things other people are pressuring me or influencing me into buying. How do I say no to that? And how do I say yes freely and have more money to say yes to things that I really do want?
I love that approach, and just sort of generally, it seems the approach that the two of you take, where look, it's not about guilting anyone for the way they've been spending their money or not saving or approaching finances in general. It's really about trying to have a better life, and part of a better life is knowing that you've saved some more for the future, but it's also being smart about saving the money so that you can do the things you love most. And I really love that you take that approach and how you think about it. And HarperCollins book deal, that's one of the biggest publishers in the world. That's huge. That's awesome. Congrats.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
thank you.
It is
They,
exciting.
our editor was as interested in the topic as we were. So, they were very excited about
That's
it.
very cool. And I hope, Jill, you're not having to hear too much from Jen about like, well, when I wrote my second book, and
Yes. There might be a little bit of that, but that's okay. I trust her.
well, before I let you go, anything about the space now that you are, I guess, veterans in the podcast industry, anything that has surprised you in terms of what it means to develop a long running podcast and that interaction you have with listeners? Any big surprises? Maybe Jill, I'll throw to you first on that one.
I think the feedback that we get from people, it still is remarkable to me, because I still feel as though I'm just talking to a friend in my living room. I mean, now it's turned into a bit more of an established office, but I can still often forget that there's this whole range of people listening. While we have an idea of the woman we're talking to, it still is this ethereal idea. But then to receive these emails back from people saying, you nearly saved my marriage. You gave me language to talk with my partner about these things that we kept hitting roadblocks and barriers to, or I never even dreamed of paying off my debt, and I just did it in a year with the tips and tricks that you've given to me, and I've binged your backlog, and here's the 15 bullet points of what is standing out to me. Of course, we've got the other end of that spectrum where people are mad at us and they don't like how our voices sound. Can't change that. Sorry. And that has in some ways equally been a surprise, because I got into podcasting to help my husband. I did not get into podcasting for people to throw firestones at me. I don't even know what that is, but the feedback, and most of it is overwhelmingly, remarkably positive, but also to this deeper level that I never thought. I think we're just having fun. We're talking about something that, in my mind, coming from the field of social work, is relatively lighthearted. And then to hear you're changing my life is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I mean, we're quick to say you put in the work, you made the decisions, like it wasn't us, but so glad to be a part of that journey and a part of the story of people experiencing well-being.
Yeah. We're just, I think what is most surprising to me is the growth that we have had. We're about to hit 5 million downloads without anything but really organic traffic, honestly. And I think it is because of how much emphasis we put back on the listener. So like letting them decide as many of our episode topics as possible, having the Bill of the Week segment where they can call in, doing polls and this or that on our Instagram, like just making it as much about our listener as possible. I think that's what's paid off most to our growth. I mean, we got an email the other day of a girl who's like, I've listened to your podcast for like a month, and now anytime anybody pauses,
A dramatic pause.
I say the Bill of the Week in my head. Like we've become like earworms. And so I think that is a kind of a testament to, like, if you make your show about your listeners, the show will grow.
Well, there are a few, it feels like a few common traits among podcasts that have longevity, and it's that sort of genuine connection between the hosts, which you guys have, the sort of a willingness to be playful and vulnerable, which you guys certainly have, and then an intelligence. Everybody walks away from an episode of Frugal Friends feeling a little bit smarter. And that's really important. And so it's a good feeling to listen to an episode, learn something, hopefully have a smile on your face, hopefully have some next steps in terms of how you're going to improve how you think about spending. But it's such a fantastic show, and just want to say thank you guys. We're thrilled to be partners with you, and congrats again on the book deal and all the success. But I hope all of our listeners and viewers today will check out Frugal Friends if you haven't already. But Jill and Jen, thanks for spending some time with us.
Thanks, Will. It's been a privilege.
Yes, thank you.
Take care, and we'll see you guys again next week.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.